The Treaty of Verdun was signed on August 10th in the year 843, officially ending the Carolingian Civil War by dividing Charlemagne's empire into West, Middle, and East Francia. The borders of Europe's most powerful nations can be traced back to this treaty and the divisions implemented by Charlemagne's grandsons, Lothair, Charles, and Louis. After the death of Europe's father in the year 814, Emperor Charlemagne's titles passed to his son Louis the Pious. 3 years later, in the year 817, Emperor Louis issued an imperial decree titled the Diviso Imperii, known today as the Ordinatio Imperii, which divided the Frankish Empire into 3 kingdoms, ruled by his 3 sons, Pepin, Louis, and Lothair. Pepin was proclaimed King of Aquitaine, Louis was proclaimed the King of Bavaria, and the eldest son Lothair was proclaimed King of Italy and co-emperor of the Carolingian Empire, confirming him as the direct heir to Charlemagne's legacy and cementing his dominion over his brothers. It sounds counterintuitive, but this act of division was meant to preserve unity in the empire. But Emperor Louis failed to include his sons Charles the Bald and Bernard. Especially heinous was the fact that Bernard was already King of Italy, a title he was expected to hand over to Lothair. Bernard's subsequent rebellion is a story for another day. So long story short, Bernard failed, and he was killed. Louis the Pious loosely held his father's empire together through 3 civil wars over the course of his remaining 24 years. Each of the 3 civil wars could be the topic of its own video, or its own soap opera for that matter. So I'm going to save those conversations for another day. The important notes are as follows. Pepin, King of Aquitaine, died, and his title was inherited by Charles the Bald. Lothair, despite being the proclaimed heir to the empire, had massive issues with his father and everyone else in his family. He was seriously unpopular. Charles the Bald and Louis the German hated each other for succession disputes. One of the aforementioned civil wars was fought because they couldn't get along. By the time Emperor Louis the Pious died peacefully in his bed at age 62, in the year 840, the empire was ready to unravel, and blood feuds needed to be settled. Upon hearing of his father's demise, Lothair wasted no time pressing his claim as emperor. According to the Ordinatio Imperii, and his father's decision to send Lothair the imperial crown and scepter shortly before his death, Lothair's imperial claim was rightful and legitimate, but his brothers Charles and Louis rejected his authority, which was over the entirety of Charlemagne's empire, thus beginning the Carolingian Civil War. Charles the Bald, ruling from the kingdom of Aquitaine, set aside his differences with his half-brother Louis the German, of the kingdom of Bavaria, and the two called their banners in direct opposition to their brother, the newly crowned Emperor Lothair. In order to even the playing field, Lothair supported his nephew, Pepin II, in his claim to the kingdom of Aquitaine, which was usurped by Charles after Pepin I's death. The fighting began late in the summer of 840, and only lasted until the early spring of 842. But the battles were bloody, indecisive, and from the accounts of bishops and soldiers alike, the fighting was downright unholy. The 2 most consequential battles were the Battle of the Rise and the Battle of Fontenoy. The first was fought between Louis the German and Lothair's imperial forces, led by Count Adalbert of Metz, on the banks of the Wörnitz River near the Rise meteorite crater. Lothair ordered the Count to prevent Louis's army from leaving Bavaria, in order to keep him from joining forces with Charles's army. Louis caught the Count by surprise and decisively destroyed his army. Count Adalbert was killed in the fighting, and the Bavarian army upgraded their armor and weaponry from the spoils of the fallen imperial troops. Louis's victory secured his army free passage to Aquitaine, allowing his forces to join with Charles, which was the prelude to the greatest battle of the war, Fontenoy. The culmination of decades of familial infighting occurred near the city of Auxerre on the 25th of June, 841. The imperial forces of Lothair and his nephew Pepin II met the conjoined forces of Aquitaine and Bavaria, led by Charles and Louis. The size of the battle is said to have been magnificent, though few historical records have survived to tell its tale. Andreas of Agnellus, a 9th century historian, claimed 40,000 soldiers died between the 2 armies. Lothair fought furiously, like a true emperor, but in the end, his army was no match for his brothers, who won a Pyrrhic victory. The cost of their triumph was immeasurable. Neither dew, nor showers, nor rain ever fell again on that field, where the most battle-hardened warriors had perished, mourned by their mothers, their sisters, their brothers, and their friends. On Charles's side, and Louis's too, the fields were white with the linen habits of the dead, as they might have been with birds in the autumn. Fontenoy, they call its fountain, manor to the peasant known. There the slaughter, there the ruin, of the blood of the Frankish race. Plains and forests shiver, shudder, horror wakes the silent marsh. The Allied brothers were able to push the imperial troops out of the imperial capital, Aachen, in March of 842, effectively winning the war, but not without great cost to their own power. They also had one serious issue. They didn't capture the emperor. Lothair retreated from the seat of his empire, which allowed him the distance to engage in peace talks without fully capitulating his throne. A temporary truce ensued, but peace talks didn't conclude until August of 843, when the three brothers met in the city of Verdun to finalize the division of their grandfather's empire. The splitting of this empire is now known after the city as the Treaty of Verdun. Lothair was allowed to keep his imperial title, as well as the Middle Kingdom of Francia. Charles received the Western Kingdom of Francia, which would eventually become the Kingdom of France, and obviously the French Republic as we know it today. Louis received the Eastern Kingdom of Francia, which was the predecessor to the Holy Roman Empire, and the German Republic. Lothair's Middle Kingdom quickly fell apart following his death, due to indefensible borders and succession crises. The descendant nations of West and East Francia would fight over the remnants of this Middle Kingdom, seemingly in perpetuo. I'm sure you've heard of at least a few of those wars. Although Charlemagne's empire was still together in name, it was effectively dissolved as a unified entity. Floris of Lyon mourned the crumbling empire in a poem titled Lament on the Division of the Empire. Even the race of Romulus yielded before this people, and Rome, fine mother of kingdoms, gave place. There the prince of this realm was crowned by the gift of the Pope, relying on Christ's protection. Oh, happy would that kingdom have been, had it known its good fortune. With Rome as its capital, and, as its guardian, the keeper of heaven's keys. Its immortal protector was the timeless ruler of the skies, who can raise kingdoms on earth into the heavens. But now that pinnacle of power, fallen from its great heights, like a garland of flowers cast down from the head, once splendid with the different scents of sweet-smelling herbs, is trodden underfoot by all, stripped of its crown. It has lost both the name and the distinction of empire, and the United Kingdom has fallen to three lots, for there is no one at all who is recognized as emperor. A petty king supplants a monarch, the fragments of a kingdom replace a realm. It's clear that the conflict between Charlemagne's grandsons has had immense ramifications on history, the formation of two European great powers being the most obvious. I'd like to hear your thoughts on a few questions I was asking myself over the course of making this video. Following the Treaty of Verdun, how many conflicts throughout European history could have been prevented if the brothers were able to peacefully negotiate their differences? Would the French, German, and Italian nations exist today if Charlemagne's descendants held this empire together? And are interpersonal conflicts or ancient succession laws more to blame for the dissolution of the empire? That's all I have for you today, folks. If you like this video, consider dropping a like, comment, or even hitting that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of Europa Historia.